Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Hiding in Your Candidate Database. We are so excited to get started. So, without further ado, let's go. I'm turning my camera. Hi, everybody. Before we get started, you can ask questions anytime via Zoom. Just a few housekeeping things. We're going to save all of the Q&A for the end of the webinar, so you can ask them anytime, but we will answer them at the end. And then this recording will also be distributed afterwards. So if you have colleagues who weren't able to attend or you just want to listen again and again, you certainly can. We will be recording it and we will be distributing it. So I am Katie Rubach. I am a product marketing manager at Sense. It's so great to meet you. I'm originally from Chicago, at a background in communication and engagement technology. Been at Sense for about 4 or 5 months now, and I'm so excited to bring all this great content and best practices to you. And I also want to introduce you to somebody else. You can see him on the screen. This is Jeff, our co-host today from Infinity Consulting Solutions. Jeff, say hello to everybody and tell us a little bit about yourself and in Infinity.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Policio. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Infinity Consulting Solutions. I've been doing marketing for staffing agencies now for the last 6 years. And have over 17 years of sales and business development experience, education, background in marketing. So I'm here to hopefully share some insights and some practical uses of the Sense tool and help everybody sort of set their agenda for next year.
Yeah, and we are going to have fun while we're doing it.
Always.
Yes, of course. I promise to all of you that are watching, it's going to be infotainment. You'll learn a lot. You will be entertained. Jeff is so fun. We've been getting ready for this for the past couple of weeks, and I know we're going to have a great conversation today. And on top of that, you're going to take a ton of stuff back to your organization that you can start using tomorrow, even if you wanted to. So what is our agenda today? So first, we're going to kind of cover what the heck is database marketing. It's kind of is it a buzzword? What does this mean? What are we talking about? Then we're going to get into database marketing in action. Jeff's going to talk about what he has done at Infinity Consulting Solutions. It's impressive, spoiler alert. And then we're going to get into the bulk of our time is going to be spent talking about how do you get started? How do you take everything that we've been talking about and how do you bring it to your organization? And then we'll save the last 10 or 15 minutes or so for Q&A. And all right, so without further ado, let's jump in. What the heck is database marketing? What are we talking about here? So database marketing, here's just a definition for everybody that's attending. It's not only marketing to existing contacts that are in your database within their entire talent lifecycle, it's also re-engaging those dormant candidates that are already in your ATS that you haven't talked to in 3 or 6 months for looking for new opportunities, giving them the same great favorable brand experience and also driving ROI for your team. I mean, I think Jeff, you and I talked about this. It's, what isn't database marketing? I think there's so much, buzz about what this is. And so here's a really clear definition of this is what we kind of talk about as database marketing. But what is it not? It's not just blasting your audience.
Right. And it's certainly not going to, it's not closing your deals, right? So none of this takes the place of all of your frontline salespeople and recruiters and all the people that you need in order to interface with your candidates and hiring managers. This is simply meant to, add additional touch points. It's meant to share information. It's meant to engage with that group in a manner that doesn't take time away from your frontline people so that your frontline people can continue to close and sell and do what they do best. And then this just basically keeps it warm. So
yeah, keeping it warm and cozy all season long. So this is a brief definition. So when we talk about database marketing, it's not just that, but kind of understanding who is actually in your database. I think most people are really familiar. Okay, yes, you've got active candidates, active placements, but we've kind of broken down what those dormant candidates look like and those dormant contacts look like into 3 kind of helpful buckets that help you kind of segment audiences. We'll get into that in a little bit about how you do that. But you have 3 different buckets. Never converted, people who have submitted their resume, they're sitting in there, but they've never really jumped to being an active placement. They've never become an actual contractor for your business. You have alumni. You have people who have worked for you in the past, but they just kind of sit dormant. Maybe you haven't reached out to them again. Maybe you have, it didn't convert. we just kind of bucket them into alumni. And then you have silver medalists, which I think this one is a really interesting spot. It's, talent who at one point or another, they often fill some of your most in-demand roles. You could always reach out to them because if there was something that was open, they were almost always like, yep, I'll absolutely jump on it. But they kind of sit there. They may not be actively being communicated with or engaged. And I think that's some really low-hanging fruit because they're people who have jumped in before, and you don't want to just leave them on the wayside.
I think these are really good fundamental groups to break it out into as well, right? Like you can really take your candidate and walk along their journey, so to speak, and identify even further segmentation if you really wanted to. But like just from that 30,000 foot view, I think that these give a really good clear indicator as to like that group that is either, actively working with you or for you in some sort of capacity, or whatever that dormant database is. I think it's really safe to just like block it into these three main categories.
Yeah, I think so too. And let's talk about why is this important? Why are all of you tuning in? Why are we talking about this today? And I think I want to start with the stat that's on the side here. So since we did a survey with our partners, and it turns out that the responses showed that 50% of net new candidates that came from job boards already existed in our respondents database. So when you got a resume, it was like, oh, this person's already in here. I didn't even know that they were looking. I didn't even know that they were interested in this kind of work. And I think that is really that's a crux of this kind of re-engagement, this database marketing that we're talking about, that 50% of new candidates are already in your database and you just didn't know. And the money that you spent to try and bring them in from a job board, from all of these different sources, they've been there the whole time, and that you just didn't realize that they were interested and that they were, back looking for work.
And this is where database marketing really comes into play, right? It's keeping those people engaged. So while they might not be actively pursuing opportunities, while they may not be in the job market, while they may not have updated their resume immediately online or they're updated their LinkedIn, at the end of the day, if you're keeping them sort of warm and active and engaging, they may convert on a secondary or tertiary piece of material that then shows interest or at least shows engagement with your brand. So, again, using your resources and technology, using automation, using workflows in order to just help facilitate maintaining, like this is really a maintenance play. So, maintaining the relationships with your database will make them that much easier to convert when you do have an opportunity that actually lines up with their background.
Yes, and actually, it's a really great transition right there. Why does this work? Why does database marketing work? It's like you prepared for this. It is so key because you want to be engaging everybody throughout the entire talent life cycle. So also, I apologize, there's a fire truck going by outside, so if you have a hard time hearing me, I promise I will just speak clearly and loudly. This is so important that you're engaging throughout the entire talent life cycle to reduce your costs in the future and increase the likelihood that somebody else, someone down the line 3 months or 6 months, when you do reach out, they do say, oh yeah, yes, I am looking for a new opportunity, or yeah, I had such a great experience with you in the past. Yes, of course, I'm interested in learning more and what roles you have available today. It's really trying to, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's look at like why they would say yes though, right? It's not just because you're like, again, like you said in the beginning of this, we're not sending an email blast. We're not blasting them once a year. Like once a year isn't going to create a relationship. This is truly, using technology to build a relationship with the individuals in your database that are not ideal people to be speaking with at that moment in time, right? You may not have a job opening, you may not have an opportunity, they may not be looking. So there's something that's not matching, but it works because you're building this digital relationship with these people, and it's so much more than just brand recognition. It's trust, right? And so you're building this relationship, this rapport with your database over time by simply doing like these very benign or inoffensive type of messages to share and to encourage wherever they are within their career or their job cycle or life cycle. And you're just simply providing them additional information along the way. Again, it builds rapport, it builds relationship, and that's why when you reach out when the time is right, that's why you get that nod. That's why you get the yes. That's why you get the, oh, I see yes. Yeah, you guys sent me that, the salary guide, or you sent me that newsletter, or you asked me, that survey last quarter. Yeah, no, I know exactly who you are. And then it's a nice warm lead in.
It's adding value at every touch point. And it's not just blasting and being like, hey, will you come, do you need work? It's offering. It's why so many folks, and I know everybody who's on the call here is committed to this, because you're tuning in, you want to learn, the best practices here. You want to be adding value at every turn, at every touch point. And that is exactly what works.
That'll be the trick too, Katie, is that like a lot of people that aren't cut from the marketing side, right? A lot of people are going to want to use this as a means of simply being able to like poke their database and say, hey, are you looking yet? Are you interested? Did you think about moving your job? Did you want to do something? Because a lot of times when I deal with, leadership here or elsewhere, et cetera, it tends to be this conversation about like, how do we get conversion? Right. And in this instance, as we're talking about database marketing as this wider, broader term, it's not about that end conversion immediately. You build this whole sequence as a means of simply creating rapport and engagement. And so, And so as you provide value, we send salary guides out on an annual basis. Why do we do that? It's not because we think that like someone who downloads a salary guide is going to be ready to jump to a new job or looking to hire someone. However, we give them salary guide information so that way they can do some checking for themselves and see where they live within the field of their, their salary range. And maybe it's a relocation opportunity, or maybe there's some insights that they would get value from. That's the type of stuff that you really want to be thinking about. And then the conversion happens. Like it happens.
It does. And I think, and again, super easy transition. Who's responsible for this? The short answer is everybody. And that is a good thing. And also it is an opportunity for a lot of education, because you need to get everybody on the same page, operations, talent acquisition, and marketing coming together. And also if you don't have a marketing team and you're just in operations, just in talent acquisition, you can absolutely do this too. This can be a one-man show. There's technology like Sense that can be, your kind of co-pilot to help you run this without a full marketing team. But exactly, Jeff, what you're saying, and it's making sure that everybody's on the same page about what the success looks like. And it's not just a conversion play, and it is about building trust and rapport and giving value at every touch point, because the conversions will come. But like you said at the beginning, this is not the end all be all to, you have your talent acquisition team that's out there that's actually, making sure people make it to placement. And that doesn't go away with this. This is just another play that helps kind of maximize your database.
Just as a side note too, like you had said, if you don't have a marketing team, it's not a problem. You can use technology to scale. The beautiful thing about going through the process of sort of getting everybody on board and having that open conversation, explaining the technology, explaining the strategy, is that if you didn't have a marketing team, or you have a small marketing team, you have the ability to also curate ideas, right? So there's no better way to be able to interface with that database than to ask your front line the types of problems and pain points that they're having, the types of conversations that they're engaging in for the people that they're talking to that don't convert, right? Mm-hmm. What are the concerns and questions that they have throughout the year? And then what is it that you can provide as a value add within that timeline in order to just simply engage and keep them moving? So, going through that education and doing that sort of exploratory conversation is an opportunity to also curate really, really good ideas for marketing as well.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to get in some of the best practices. Like, it is about working with the teams that you have to get the best content, and content really is king. I won't spoil that quite yet, because Jeff, what I want you to talk about all of the great work that you've done. We've been alluding to some of that a little bit. Sure. But this is really one example of database marketing in action. I think every business is different, and every goal is, outcome is different. And so what have you done at ICS to really bring this to life? I will let you kind of talk through. This is your
my baby. Sure. So as many of you probably have these databases that run pretty wide and pretty old. Over time, ICS didn't always have a marketing department, and so when they brought me in, we had years. In fact, we had over 10 years of database that was sitting there and collecting dust and sort of sitting in all the different like nooks and crannies of our ATS, our applicant tracking system. With that, we looked for an opportunity to see, could we sort of breathe life back into this old database? Like, could we actually get these people to re-engage and see sort of like some real potential there? Because, someone who's applying for a job, they might create separate emails to apply for jobs, then now those emails are dormant. They may no longer be a part of that email address if they don't work for the company anymore. So it's a bit of a process. So in essence, long story short, we had 6.6 million dormant candidates in our database that nothing was happening with. So I took those and brought them to a third-party email cleanup tool. I can mention them, right? Email Hippo, is that fine? So, I just did. So Email Hippo was the company that I used. I brought them there, but you have a multitude of different companies that you can use. I happen to select them. They took our 6.6 million and turned it into 5.5 million of verifiable email addresses. Now, all that means is that they ping the email address and it bounces back, and they know that it's a good email address, or at least that it's not a bad email address. How about that?
Right.
So we sent out a really basic, inoffensive message, right? With low unemployment, boosting wages, how much has it improved the working conditions? And so we basically just asked a really simple survey of how happy are you in your current role? Now, I didn't have to worry about anything in here other than the fact that the person's first name was Katie, right? I used a personalization token, dropped it in. Other than that, everything else is universal. That message goes to everybody, independent of their role, their vertical, how long they've been in there, tenure, etc. Doesn't matter. So we send this out, and the results were actually pretty good. I believe you have the results, right?
I do. Yeah, they're on the next slide right here. And I will say, just before you jump into these, I cannot stress to everybody tuning in how amazing this approach is. It is so, when you talk about non-offensive, it is offer. We just want to know how happy you are in your current role. We want to know how, are you miserable? It's such a welcome response, or a welcome message to people. And you may get into this with some of the results, but I just want to say, this branches.
And even the words, even the words that we used, right? Like, I wasn't stuffy. It wasn't like, are you like, super, like, you know what I mean? Like, we didn't use like a Likert scale, like strongly disagree, agree, whatever. We used like real life words. Like, are you miserable at your job? Or are you thrilled at your job? Right? We made it so that it was more conversational. And I'll stress too, like, the more conversational you make it, the more real it feels.
Right.
So
and the thing here that I also just want to make sure everybody knows is that, so this branches. So if someone responds, 1 to maybe 4 or 5, you say, hey, that sounds bad. It sounds like that's not great. Do you want to sign up for job alerts?
Mm-hmm.
To maybe think about finding something else.
Yep.
Which is such a great, subtle way to not say, oh, well, you should get a job with us. Just, hey, do you want to sign up for job alerts? That doesn't sound awesome. And even if somebody's thrilled, offering them another piece of content and saying, I'm so happy that you're happy, not pushing job alerts. I'm so happy you're happy. We also have a salary guide. Check to make sure you're being paid fairly. You're offering that value without pushing, the conversion, as we've kind of been talking about. It's such a subtle way that I think is a beautiful one way to do this. Again, one of many ways. There's a lot of creativity out there to also do this right. I just love it. This is a great example. So let's talk about the results. Sorry.
Sure. No worries. No worries. So so now we're partway through this, just about halfway. We've got 2.5 million candidates contacted so far. The open rate is a little bit low. So I will say that, like, in full transparency, when you have a database that's super old, hasn't really been touched, is in essence neglected over time, I don't expect massive open rates. But what I will say is that from the open rate to the click and the click to the response, those numbers are phenomenal. I've been doing marketing and sales and business development for quite a long time. And from an automated email response, I'm shocked at how high the numbers are. So once we sort of get past that hurdle, that conversation of like, well, the open rates aren't really good, you start looking at those conversions down the line, and it tells you something. So it tells you that from the point at which the individual has read the subject line to the context of the message, the actual meaning of the message, it lined up perfectly.
Yeah.
And then when they clicked on it in order to be able to then give their response, where they went to, all of that messaging also lined up perfectly, or as close to it as it could. And so as you're going to have drop off, it's rare that you have, only 1,000 people dropping off from clicks to responses.
It is really good. And I think that this is a really, and we're going to hit this kind of again and again throughout getting certain things to remember. We've been talking about engaging across the entire life cycle. If you're able to engage throughout the life cycle and then, reach out to somebody 3 or 6 months after that with something like a survey, your likelihood for response and the open rate there is much higher. When you're dusting off a database that hasn't been touched at all in a long time, it's an understanding that, the email opens may not be, but that's not the goal. The goal is not to get 100% email open rate of people you haven't talked to in 2 years, however long that is. But for people who do, you want to make sure that message resonates, and this is exactly the kind of response that you want to be seeing. You want to see people who go, oh yeah, I'll check this out. Oh great, yeah, no, this totally resonates with me, and I want to engage. And that's the kind of success to expect. And I think that's a really big takeaway. Again, we're going to hit this again, but when you walk out of this and remembering, how do I want to bring this to life? And it's making sure to convey that to your leadership team and understanding that just because we reach out to our dormant candidate database, it doesn't mean that every single person is going to open our email. But of the people that do, we want them to find value and we want them to engage. And I think that's really, really key.
And just a little bit of transparency too on this. There's no subsequent workflow on this yet, because when it was built, we didn't know what we were going to get. As a marketer, I had no clue how this was going to respond. And so what we did is we provided, like Katie mentioned, we provided pivot points so that if you scored below a certain number, we offered you the ability to set up job alerts if you'd like. And if you were thrilled, that was great. But we did offer you, some information, some insight into like what salaries were driving in your local market. And from there, it's a matter of simply like baselining this, figuring out what the appropriate next step is. They haven't been touched in 10 years. It's not that detrimental that you wait 3 months or 4 months to be able to really sort out and strategize what your next step is going to be and what makes sense for these individuals.
Exactly. I think this actually is a great point. Let's just jump right into, we'll continue this conversation right into getting started. All of the things that we're talking about right now are questions that you want to be asking when you're setting the strategy. So you need to decide with your team, understanding first who's going to be in the room, who do you need to partner with, but it is at what points in that talent life cycle are we going to impact? So if you're engaging somebody who you haven't, spoken to in 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years or more, what is that experience going to be like for them? Do you need to think through? Are you going to learn? I think as Jeff, you're kind of talking about, I think it's a good best practice is to take some of this and just to know that the first time you go through it, you're going to learn, and you need to see what those responses are like and how are people interacting with your communication. If it's, if it blows out of the water, great. Then you jump in and go, okay, now how are we going to hand these things off? How do we want these, these candidates, these dormant candidates to be engaged with on a human level after they engage with us? But before that, I think it's where along that talent life cycle does it matter that you engage with them, and what touch points really matter most? I think, and we'll get into this a little bit. Jeff, you've said one of my favorite quotes, which is those touch points that matter most are where the expectation is the same for everybody.
Sure.
It's where it's the most consistent expectation. It's like a first day check-in or something where across every person that's in your database, they want to be reached out to. They want to be having a really great experience. And again, it's always adding value.
Yep.
What KPIs determine the success? That's the entire thing we were just talking about, which is it's setting the expectation. It's not about, we want to get 100% email open rate. Okay, that's amazing. And
it's also hard too, because a lot of people want to drive, and I do too, right? Even as a marketer, I want to make sure that I'm driving influenced revenue. But, KPIs in marketing don't really line up that directly like they do in sales, where it's like, okay, if we make this many phone calls, we get this many deals closed, we make this much money. In this case, especially for a lot of the people that are on this call that maybe aren't, completely dedicated to just a marketing role like I am, they might be wearing multiple hats, or, people who are just getting their feet wet with doing some marketing with their database. The KPIs should really be task oriented, right? Especially in the very beginning. Now, those can evolve over time, and you can grow them into a revenue, tracking sort of KPI, a key performance indicator. But, in the very beginning, it should be organizing the touch points, or defining the one or few touch points that you're going to sort of initiate with, whether that be a dormant database or I'm a huge fan of targeting people once they are placed. And that is because there's actually two pieces of the information, right? Everybody's expecting the same treatment, and your data is also probably as accurate as it ever will be, right? Because people want to get paid properly on their commissions. So, that goes into your last bullet point when we're talking about like tools, resources, and data. If the data is really, really clean and people want to get paid properly, so I know it's going to be clean, and the expectations are all there that everybody, no matter the vertical, the title, the level, the seniority, the role, you're all going to expect the same sort of treatment. That is a great place to sort of initiate any sort of marketing automation.
Right. And then there's exactly with that, before you really jump in, it's, what tools do you need to make sure it gets done? What, do you have the resources to make sure you have a clean database? And is that data, in a spot where you can actually use it? I am going to promise, I'm going to keep us moving right along, so I promise everybody that we are going to end on time. So we're going to jump into these best practices. As we're talking about, resources, tools, data, making sure that your data is clean. I know Jeff talked about that, making sure those emails are valid. That is just such a good point. And again, it's a no-brainer when we say it out loud. Of course, your outreach is only as good as your data is. So making sure that you're taking the time to clean your database and to make sure that the people you're going to be reaching out to do have valid email addresses, or are the people, you're going to segment those audiences by, the alumni. Do you want a different message for who you reach out to who's worked for you before versus someone who's never been placed? Those are all kind of things to consider, and that all kind of ties back to that data cleanliness, to make sure that your audiences are segmented and to make sure that you're reaching out with reaching out with something that's relevant and to the right people. And this is, Jeff, you and I talked about this a lot, which is, you can't get stuck with analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
Which anything that's going to be automated, anything that's going to be going to a wide audience, it is never going to be perfect. And that is something to take away today, that, somebody's first name may be in a Wingdings font. I love what you typed. That's my favorite thing you've ever said, which is their name being but you can't get hung up on that. You can't get hung up on one person's name is weirdly formatted or they've typed it in wrong. That should not stop you from starting something like this, because the majority is really what matters here, to make sure, you don't get stuck, or else you'll never be able to begin an initiative like this if you're hoping for 100% perfection when it comes to that.
What I would say is this, we had said earlier slides that, making sure you're rallying your group, making sure that everybody knows what's going on, and sort of pulling them into the conversation so that they're aware of the marketing automation. This kind of goes hand in hand with that, right? If you give them an appropriate amount of time in order to be able to do some basic database cleanup, I know a lot of my people here, they use the first name, they'll put like in, parentheses, like what their nickname is or what the name they go by is versus their formal name. Give them some time to clean up your active people, right? I mean, the reality is this, and the beautiful thing is that your database will be many, 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 many times more large than the people that your front line is actually working with. So if you give them an appropriate amount of time, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, that gives you time to build the workflows on the back end, but it gives them time to clean up the database so that way, if their people are touched at whatever the point is, or the journey is that you're going after, at least those people that have generated revenue for you, at least those people are really clean, right? Anything else that comes out of this old database, whether you're, however you're curating these names through harvesting or what have you, depends on the ATS that you're on. But however it is that you're going about it, anything that converts, let's be honest, like that's that's the cream rising to the top. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
It
it was
really is.
otherwise dormant and dusty and sitting there doing nothing. So like, at least this is an opportunity that maybe, you know, it creates something for you.
Well, and that's actually just like quickly, you know, there's a way, you know, and since we recognize this, you know, this data cleanliness is so important to just the longevity and making sure that you're, anytime that you're reaching out to somebody, you have the right first name, you have the right email address. And what's really great is, you know, we're really focused on that data enrichment piece, and that you can, you know, sync responses back to your ATS, so that you can, you know, if you ask somebody, is this your correct email address, they give you a new one that's written back to your ATS, so you don't have to worry about going and manually updating it. And that's something that I think data cleanliness is really going, and that's, again, that's a whole, I could do a whole other webinar on data cleanliness and data enrichment, but that is something to really consider when you're looking at database marketing is, are you using technology that enriches your data when you're communicating and engaging with your candidates?
Yeah.
That's all. I'll get off my small soapbox about data enrichment right there. And
type A's, don't let it stop you from moving forward. Type A's, don't let it move. Don't let it stop you.
Don't let
let
perfection stop you from moving forward. It is absolutely okay. And this, and we've been talking about this a lot. I know we've, you know, engaging at every step of the talent life cycle. It's giving a positive experience, reducing your future spend by making sure that somebody who's, you know, recognized that there's trust and there's value at every point that they've, you know, been in contact with your brand. So when you do reach out for, hey, we have some new openings, are you interested? That likelihood for a yes is higher. And this building into your entire strategy, we kind of mentioned, these are some actually great examples to think about where is that expectation the same, and where is that data usually you know, usually most accurate. And that first day, you're right, that start date is always a super clean data point, because everybody's going to make sure their start date's right so that they get paid on time.
Right.
I mean, that's a nugget right there.
It's fantastic. It's actually where we started. So to just, again, like, we started there, it was the best place to start.
Right. And even if you're, you know, I know Jeff mentioned this about, you know, it's about maintenance and making sure that you're maintaining a great experience. You know, you can still find candidates for active roles with this. You know what I mean? By when I have this point here, we have this point on redeployment. So 30 days before a placement ends, reaching out to see if they want to continue working with you, or if they'd like another opportunity in the future, to note that back in your ATS so that you aren't missing those opportunities in the future. You can use a candidate or a talent experience play, like a maintenance play, to still benefit you in the future with something like a redeployment workflow. And then there's just a couple of other examples, you know, creating a referral campaign. So someone, you know, Jeff's team uses survey. If you ask someone how their experience is and they give you a 9 or a 10, follow that up with, you know, great, do you know anybody else who wants like to work with us? Would you like to refer us? You know, would you give us a review online? And really build that positive experience and add on automatically so that you're really engaging at every step. And I think some of these other ones that really get into that, you know, the re-engaging that dormant database, you can do that proactively so that in 6 months you don't have a completely dormant, you know, set of candidates who you've never talked to. Follow up post-placement asking for an updated resume or new skills that they learned after that placement's over. So keep engaging them and saying, hey, I just want to make sure that we keep your profile up to date, and we want to make sure we've got as much information about your experience as possible. And then, as you know, Jeff already talked about with the survey, re-engage those dormant candidates 3 to 6 months later with a check-in or a survey asking how, you know, do they feel satisfied with what they're being paid? Do they, you know, are they happy in their current role? And just reach out. I think that's with some value. Those are just a couple of basic examples to kind of get some ideas going.
You know, also just say, like, there's usually a little bit of apprehension around a redeployment workflow. You know, it's sort of like that thing, like, you know, if they're still billing and everybody's happy, like, we don't want to sort of like poke at the sleeping bear. But I will also share with you that when you do a good redeployment survey, if you actually have things sort of in place, but you do a good redeployment workflow, sorry, not survey, it provides you some insight into that engagement, right? So when you're engaging with that individual who's already been placed, you could find out, hey, how are the projects going? Are they getting extended? Are they looking for more hours? Do they need more people? Now, when your salesperson is equipped with this information, they can contact that hiring manager and say, hey, Susan, John, whatever, I know that the contract is coming up for our contractor that's in your space. You have 30 days. Did you want to extend that out further? Do you need more people? Da, 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 right? It makes you, again, it partners you with the people that you're working with.
Right.
And it's
Right.
building that relationship and building that rapport.
That redeployment workflow, and I promise we could do a whole other webinar just on these pieces. That redeployment workflow works both ways.
Yep.
Where you can be reaching out 30 days before the end of, or even, sometimes folks don't give an end date. It's you in the light industrial space and a lot of different markets. There may not be a specific end date, and just reaching out and saying, hey, just checking in, seeing, do you need more people? Do you have any idea? They may know, but they just may not be reaching out to you proactively.
Right.
And a slight touch helps kind of get that information so you can close that loop.
It's a nudge.
But
yep.
Nice little nudge. And this is, we've just been talking about content a lot. Those are, 5 great examples of workflows and touch points that all really elevate the talent experience. At the core of that and the core of all of this is content, and that content is king. And we kind of talked about that a little bit when Jeff was you were showing us the survey. So much of it is in the details, and so much of it is in the creativity and the tone. And I love this. We talked about as we're preparing for this, and creating that content mix is like reading tea leaves. It's not an exact science. As a marketer, I so wish it was. I wish it was a black and white, but sometimes you send emails out, even just in any business, you send an email out and it does exceptionally well. And, you could send one that's just, follows what you thought were the same best practices, and it doesn't do as well. And so it's really, it's doing some trial and error to understand what your audience likes to engage with, what resonates, what calls to action are really the most powerful. But we've kind of put it down into these 2 big, especially if you're going across the entire, life cycle, you're re-engaging folks who you haven't spoken to in a long time. These are 2, we've put it down to these. They sound very generic, but it is the best place to kind of start. It is the best place to kind of start.
I mean, honestly, so for the people that are on the call that are on the webinar that think that, like, again, you haven't created these things in the past, draft that first copy and then ask yourself if it works in a week, and then ask yourself if it works again in 6 months, and if it works again in 12 months, right? The idea, a lot of times we tend to craft an email, especially myself, first run will be, on Friday, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, oh, right, like this thing isn't going to go out like the same time all the time with every single person. So like I have to pull specifics out of it, right? So, make it evergreen, not super generic because then it won't be relevant, but make it evergreen, and then, keep it personal, but not too specific.
Right. I mean, and when we talk about those audiences, those segments, your alumni versus ones who have never been placed. To segment by those 2 is a good idea, so you can be a little bit more personalized to folks who have worked with you in the past. But are you going to be as specific, like, well, you worked with us at this time frame, no, you're one
summer,
level up.
Right.
You're one level up because you value who they've worked with you in the past. That's okay. It's as personal as you need to. You don't need to be so hyper-specific, because then it doesn't really scale, and then you're constantly having to go and check, and you'll get stuck with that analysis paralysis to make sure that all of
you also don't want to lose credibility. Like that's really the main thing in this, right? Like if you were to say something even as simple as like last summer, but that person was actually placed in the winter, you ultimately lose credibility, because they may not think that it's an automated email, number one. So now they think that you really don't know who they are, or they're going to smell out an automated email and then they're not going to want to deal with you either, right? So like you don't want to lose credibility by trying to be like super specific. You want to make sure that, again, you're sort of playing to that middle line a little bit, use the personalization tokens where you feel confident, first name, things like that, but try not to be too specific.
Right. Well, and things like, a sense platform, an engagement platform, you can add in those tokens like first name, the name of their last placement, the company they worked with. You can add in those personalization variables so that you can assure that your data and your outreach is always clean. I'm going to keep us moving right along as we're talking about content, and we've talked about this. I love surveys so much. I mean, they are, if you're at a point where you're like, I don't really know what to do, I almost always think surveys are the lowest hanging fruit, because everyone loves to tell people what they think. Not just about not like, you know, from an NPS, that's one type, Net Promoter Score is one type of survey, but the survey that, you know, Jeff did, which is, how happy are you in your current role? Or are you happy with what you're currently being paid? And that's a jumping point to pivot and then add value that might lead to a conversion further down the line.
Yep.
But these are all things that you can not only, you know, to elicit a response from somebody, but you can use this data to, you know, anything that you gather from folks about current role happiness or their willingness to relocate or their salary satisfaction, you can use that data in, you know, future insights that you put in other emails. And I know, and that's exactly what you guys did, which is brilliant.
Yeah, the happiness, the satisfaction survey in terms of like their current happiness in their role, you know, we pulled that information out and we included it in our most recent salary guide because there was something sort of provocative about the data that we were able to pull out of it. And that's something that, like, on the back end, one of the things to consider for me on my side is to simply provide a step 2 in that workflow is really to let them know what the findings were of that survey. So in 2019, as a year end, in 2019, the survey that you took, the results found this. Interesting, you know, and again, like, you know, offer some additional insight, maybe some additional resources. If you are the resource, they'll come to you, you know?
Yeah. And we kind of touched on, we don't, you know, if we're talking about what that workflow looks like after, you know, you talk about automated emails, make sure you don't forget the human touch. Automation and people make this work, making sure things are handing off to a real person to be handled, you know, with, again, like technology, like a sense, you know, you can send these automated emails, but it comes from a recruiter, and if someone responds, those can be handed back off to somebody on your recruiting team to handle personally. And it's really good to make sure that you are fielding responses for positive responses and negative responses. Everything should have a human touch to it, and that's a thing to, you know, as Jeff already mentioned, keeping your recruiters informed and ready to field those responses, keeping everybody informed helps kind of take this to the next level. I'm also
marketing doesn't close anything. No. You know, marketing, it doesn't. Like we bump it up, but we don't close anything.
Right. And I mean, that's why you do that handoff. That handshake is there to help really, really seal the deal. And that's why this automation and people really does make this work exceptionally well as one beautiful oiled machine. So I know, and I want you to talk super briefly, I'm looking at time, so I want us to keep us moving right along. As we've talked about this engaging the active database, and you talked about, you know, increasing the touch points, all the ways, how, you know, a little bit about how you've engaged the active database. You've, you know, you've been engaging the folks you haven't talked to in a long time, but you've also been doing a great job of engaging the active database too. Yeah,
so really briefly, you know, we looked at the active database. You know, again, we defined that moment where the data would be the most accurate and the expectations would be the most similar between our candidates. And that really is at the start date. And so, and obviously you could have a couple of errors in there, but like for the most part, it's probably 99.9% accurate. And so with that, you know, we set a goal of simply increasing the touch points. You know, after someone was placed, we were typically averaging, you know, a human connection somewhere in the ballpark of around like 1.5 to 2 touch points per candidate. And that's not a great experience after you just sort of went through the entire hiring process of the company. So in turn, we used marketing automation in order to do a 1-day check-in, a 1 week, a 2 week, a 1 month, and then we would like stretch it out, right? So as the time went on, we did like, you know, a 6-month check-in or what have you. And with those, we used the sort of dynamic approach to the surveys that Sense has, so that if someone were to respond on day 1, week 1, you know, 2nd week, that they were in distress, anything 7 or lower, like that's cause for concern. And so they would be asked a question in that of, you know, what's going on and is there anything that we can do to sort of or what could be done to change or improve the situation? And they tell us. And then those things go back to the recruiter gets that information, and then they can then facilitate with the human connection that we just talked about.
Right.
Conversely, if someone is even happy, we still forward that along to our recruiters. Those recruiters then do follow-up in order to celebrate that as well. And so we've seen our net promoter scores go up, not just within Sense, but also third-party tools that we use, like Best of Staffing, that I'm sure a lot of people experience on here. Our net promoter scores have gone up just by virtue of including additional touch points in the post-close So as well as referrals. So, we use that stuff. When they're positive, we also ask for, like Katie said, we ask for Glassdoor, we ask for Google reviews, we ask them to follow our social media. We do make sure that like when you're happy, we try to like sort of keep you in the pocket and like keep you happy, kind of like continue to re-peak happiness is sort of the goal.
And I think that's a fantastic way to phrase this about re-peaking happiness. So throughout all of this, and I think this is a great, just the top tips to everybody that's listening, putting them all together. It's, from the successes that you've seen in re-engaging the dormant database, engaging the active one, kind of wrapping these up into 5 personal top tips.
Yeah.
Keeping that team informed, don't get stuck, type A's, don't get stuck by 100% perfection.
It'll never be perfect.
Never be perfect. Building the content touch points that re-peak that talent happiness. Where can you make somebody excited and delighted to be working with you? Automate, especially where that recipient has the same expectation, and of course remembering that human element, the handoff, and then of course don't lose sight of what the goal is. Don't lose sight of what the point is. It's not about 100% conversion, and it's about making sure that someone's being delivered valuable content and building trust and making sure someone feels like they have a partner in the company that they're working with.
Yep.
And I think another piece of that too is just partnering with great technology. And Jeff, it's been the partnership in building this out with Sense and Infinity. It's really about picking a partner to help you accomplish this, and not just a vendor, and making sure they kind of hit against all of these points. Specializing in the industry, offering that easy to use functionality, supporting every aspect of the life cycle, and making sure everything integrates with the ATS you use so that you can sync back to your ATS and track real-time engagement. It's more than just, these checkpoints. It's about having a partner to help you build a database marketing campaign and strategy that really fits your business.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah, I know that's what we're like.
I mean,
this one it's incredibly key, and I'm moving us right along because I want to make sure we have a lot of Q&A, and I want to make sure we get to as many of those as we can. But these are the top 5 takeaways that we've got. So really you're getting 10 out of this because you've got Jeff's top tips that we just went through, and then you've got the top 5 takeaways, which is which we've kind of hit a lot of these today, which is you need to be tracking and measuring that success. What key performance indicators are important? I love Jeff's tip about when you're starting. Is it just getting 2 more emails out, 2 more touch points out, and then measuring what those results look like and setting benchmarks? So you're not setting goals that are unachievable and not founded in any data. Starting with clean data, remembering that automation is not perfection, but you need a clean database to be able to start doing this. Building that consistent, where I think a lot of people get really excited about that, re-engaging a completely dormant database. Yeah. But really the best way to do database marketing is to engage across the current life cycle.
Yeah.
And keep them engaged. And that's how you really build a valuable, campaign from start to finish. And I think 3, I want people to leave with that. Really, yes, to dust off the old database, but start engaging the people you already have and are already active, and then add in touch points 3 or 6 months after their placement is ended. And I promise you will not be disappointed with the results. And keeping your content evergreen and valuable, always offering value, always offering information, and always, coordinating across your teams, making sure that you are coordinated, everybody's on the same page, you have the same goals, and that is not something that we can overstate enough, is that it is not just a marketing play, it is an entire team play, and that's really, really important.
Agreed.
Yeah. And before, I know, want to make sure everyone gets out on time and we get our questions. And last thing too, as you're listening in today and you're learning a lot about database marketing, and we've mentioned a lot of things that Sense can do. Sense, we offer Sense for Marketers, which is a package that helps marketers basically up-level every touch point of the talent lifecycle. And so you can automate and nurture relationships with candidates, customers, and employees, showcase your employer brand. We've talked about the Net Promoter Score surveys. Sense can do proactive pull surveys and referral programs, the building on-brand visuals, digests. If you're not a marketer and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to build on-brand communication, that's why you use a tool like Send, so we can help you out with that. So if you want to learn more, or you want to start doing database marketing in your current Sense platform, if you're a Sense customer already, just reach out and we will absolutely get in touch to help you kind of bring this to life.
If I could just say too, like one thing that Sense does really, really well, I mean, they've got the workflows and the pivot points within the surveys and everything else, but it's proven through research that the more organic an email looks, the higher the conversion. And a lot of these, everything that we're talking about here is all email conversion. And so, things don't need to be overdeveloped. They don't need to have like an HTML template. It doesn't need to look like a landing page. It needs to look like an email that came from someone's desk. And I think Sense does a really good job of creating that like dynamic content in a very organic way. So it does a really good job of that.
That's a very nice compliment.
Aww.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. All right, so we've got a ton of questions from Q&A, and I know that we've got about 7 minutes left. If we don't get to your question live, or we will make sure that we respond, we will send you an email and answer your question or put you in touch with somebody who absolutely can. So thank you so much to so many great questions that have already come in. This one from Kevin: can people opt in and out of email blasts, notifications, etc.? So with something like a Sense, absolutely yes. You can opt out, you can unsubscribe, you can make sure.
We should also say that we assume that if they're in your database, that they have opted in at some point. Right. So so from that first initial send, we assume that there's an opt-in element to it. And then after that, like as they're getting emailed, yes, they can definitely they can opt out. And then it's really, really easy to go into the profile of the individual as well. So if they email you back with like, I don't want you, I want to get removed from your list, it's also really easy to just click a radio button and turn them off as well.
Right. Yeah. I love this question from Leslie. Are you recommending pinging your entire database that would include place candidates and hiring managers? So you don't have to send to your entire database. Not at once. You don't need to send. Dripping it out. Yeah, dripping out is a must. Because think about that influx that comes back in. Is your team going to be able to handle that? That flood of responses. And since you can use fields from your ATS to filter your audience, like by their start date, and you want to, 6 months after, or their end date, 6 months after their end date, or even just using an arbitrary date like their birthday, and saying I want to begin to slowly filter through everybody. And yes, you want to engage with every person in some way, shape, and form, but you can use those ATS fields to segment that audience and make sure you're giving everybody a curated experience. Because I think hitting everybody at once is not always
well, not to mention you also want to make sure that your emails go through to the inbox, right? So like that's why that 6.6 million campaign started earlier in 2019 and it's still not done yet, or the 5.5. And so if you're segmenting your audience properly, as we said in the very top of the call, with your dormant database and then your active database and sort of keeping them separated, I think your communication will actually make sense. The context will match up. And then absolutely use some of the different fields in order to sort of trigger some sort of trickling effect, because we monitor it all through like a care inbox that we created. And we're a relatively small marketing team in this company. So we're handling all of that manually. So.
Right. So you want to make sure that you're doing that trickle. And I think, again, if we can reinforce anything, it really is making sure that you're segmenting and making those audiences smaller so that you can give more relevant content, again, not hyper relevant, but more relevant content so that you're going to elicit a better response.
It's a personal experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you want to talk more about all of these different strategies and ways to do this for your business, just reach out and we'd love to chat about it. Honestly, I feel like I could talk about this for days. I'm such a marketing nerd when it comes to this. Question from, can this tool be used with client contacts, i.e. hiring managers? Yes, absolutely. As we kind of alluded to with that redeployment workflow, you can reach out to, you can do this in all kinds of ways, but yes, you can contact sales contacts, client contacts, all that kind of other side of the aisle. You can absolutely use any sort of database marketing approach that we've been talking about to any of those contacts as well.
What I would say is on that contact side, on that side, I would be a little extra careful with the database in terms of cleanliness and everything else, because you're not just upsetting potentially one candidate, you're upsetting potentially a whole list of openings, a whole list of job recs that you won't get. So you'd want to be probably a little bit more delicate with the database, again, interfacing with your groups, making sure your salespeople are aware, getting their buy-in, having them do their cleanse. But yeah, it's a great tool for it as well.
And I like that point that you actually just made, which is, again, it's just making sure everybody, it's a coordinated effort. Everybody is on the same page.
Right.
This is very easy to stand up. And I think more of the time and the resources for people to understand where to go is getting everybody on the same page, making sure everybody's bought in and everybody's excited about it, which is very easy to get them excited. We're going to automate, we're going to reach out to folks and give them valuable content, and they're going to respond back to us, and we'll make sure that you get to engage with them. Great. Who wouldn't be excited about that?
Right. We're going to help you.
Right. Somebody asked a question about showing slides. We will be sending this out afterwards, so you will get to see all the slides. I apologize if I was flipping through things quickly. You just had so much great content. Great question from Catherine. So you can create groups, i.e. based on tenure, skill set, etc. The answer is yes. You can group anybody based on any ATS field that you've got, based on how long they've worked with you before, what kind of skills they have, and you can make those audiences segmented, but you can reach out to them in any way, shape, or form that you would like to. Let's see, another great question. This one actually, Jeff, we may have to have you reach out to this person. Jeff, sure. Let's say, this will actually take this one offline. It's specifically about what workflows you would have created to get the most responses from a specific example. So I'll put you two in touch. Last one, is this survey a template made in Sense? The survey that, Jeff, that we showcased at the beginning.
So the template, I guess the only thing that's really templated is that 1 through 10 scale, right? So as you select the different surveys, but then you can add your words on the bottom. You can make it mean whatever you want it to mean. So and then you can pivot it however you'd like. So there is that sort of logic behind it, so that you can sort of do those things. It gives you the option to within the template.
Yes, but those the NPS, those scale of 1 to 10, and true NPS, and then rating scales are all templates that are available in Sense that you can customize. And that is the last question that we are going to be able to field today. Thank you all so much for joining. Jeff, thank you so much for your incredible insight, for being a fantastic co-host today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, of course. Let's just talk for another 2 hours. Everybody just saddle up. And if we didn't get to your question, I will make sure that we reach back out to you and answer it directly. I will be sending out this recording tomorrow, along with some fun other content to help you kind of get started. And again, Jeff, just thank you so much for being fantastic, for sharing all of the great work that you guys have done at Infinity with everybody here. And to everyone who joined, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you at another Sense webinar soon.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. We'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody. Bye.